The blueprint spread across my desk. A sterile grid of lines and dimensions offered no solace. My pen hovered, a featherweight instrument of precision, yet it felt like a leaden anchor in my trembling grip. Another residential tower, another client eager for clean lines and expansive views. I saw only walls, windows, and the terrifying potential for collapse. The air in the office was recycled, filtered, and tasted of stale ambition. I preferred it that way. No scent of pine, no whisper of autumn leaves. Those things carried too many ghosts. My name is Raj, and I am an architect, or I was. Now I am just a man who designs cages, hoping they hold. It had been 3 years since the fire, 3 years since the house, a testament to my early ambition, devoured everything I loved. My family. My wife, her laughter bright as a sunrise. My daughter, whose small hand used to fit so perfectly in mine. I had designed every beam, every joist, every fire escape that proved useless. The official report cited an electrical fault, a tragic accident, but I knew the geometry of grief. I knew the sharp angles of guilt that carved themselves into my marrow. I had built their tomb. I lived in a quiet hum of self-imposed isolation, the silence a constant companion, occasionally broken by the murmur of the television or the distant sirens of the city. My routine was rigid, a scaffolding against the chaos of memory. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. There was no room for deviation, no space for spontaneity. Spontaneity led to vulnerability, and vulnerability led back to the fire. Then came the letter. Thick parchment, an unfamiliar crest, delivered by a solemn courier who left it on my doorstep like an ill omen. It was from a solicitor, a firm I'd never heard of, informing me of an unexpected inheritance. A distant relative, a great-aunt twice removed, had passed, leaving me her ancestral home, a place called Blackwood Manor. I hadn't known she existed. I hadn't known any of my family beyond the immediate circle, shattered now, existed. The news landed with the weight of a granite slab, an ancestral home. The words conjured images of crumbling stone, forgotten portraits, and dust motes dancing in sunbeams. It was the antithesis of my clean, modern designs, the very opposite of the controlled environments I now sought to create. My first instinct was to refuse to sell it sight unseen. What use did a man like me have for an old house steeped in history? History for me was a weapon. But the solicitor, a clipped, formal voice on the phone, had been insistent. "It's a significant estate, Mr. Raj, quite valuable even in its current state of disrepair. Perhaps a change of scenery would do you good." His words, though well-meaning, felt like an intrusion, a clumsy attempt to poke at wounds I kept carefully bandaged. Yet a sliver of something stirred within me. Not hope, not exactly, more like a morbid curiosity. A chance, perhaps, to bury myself not in concrete and steel, but in the forgotten echoes of someone else's past. A past that wasn't mine, wasn't scorched. I took the train north, then a series of increasingly smaller buses, until the pavement gave way to gravel, and the last signs of civilization dwindled into distant memory. The landscape grew wilder, the trees taller and more gnarled, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers against a bruised sky. My phone lost signal miles back, severing my last connection to the world I knew. Blackwood Manor revealed itself slowly, emerging from a thick shroud of mist and overgrown foliage. It wasn't the grand, imposing edifice I'd half expected, but something far more unsettling. The paint, once a stately gray, peeled in long, curling strips, revealing patches of raw, weathered wood beneath. A stone wall half-collapsed marked the boundary of what might have once been a meticulously kept garden. Now it was a tangle of thorny bushes and weeds choked with the ghosts of forgotten blossoms. A shiver traced its way down my spine, unrelated to the biting wind. This wasn't just old, it felt. Weary, like it had seen too much, endured too much. The front door, a heavy oak monstrosity, groaned open with a sound like a dying beast when I finally managed to push it. Inside, the air was thick, stagnant, carrying the smell of dust, mildew, and something else, something faintly metallic like old pennies. Dust motes, thick as snowflakes, danced in the weak shafts of light that pierced the grimy windows. I wandered through the lower floors, a ghost in a house of ghosts. Rooms stretched out, filled with shrouded furniture that looked like slumped figures, their secrets hidden beneath white sheets. My breath plumed in the frigid air. Eventually, my search for a circuit breaker or a fuse box led me down a narrow, creaking staircase, past a pantry filled with empty jars and cobwebs, and into the gloom of the basement. And then I heard it. A low, persistent thrumming, vibrating faintly through the stone floor beneath my feet. It was a mechanical sound, deep and steady, out of place in this silent tomb. I followed the sound, my heart beginning to pick up its pace, a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. Around a corner at the very end of the basement corridor, a sliver of light escaped from under a heavy wooden door. Pushing it open, I stepped into a room filled with the deafening roar of machinery. It was the laundry room, industrial machines humming. 3 massive, ancient washing machines stood against one wall, their metal drums churning. Water sloshing, cycles running. Steam plumed from vents, condensing on the low ceiling and dripping onto the concrete floor. The air was thick with the smell of hot metal, stale water, and a faint, cloying sweetness like old, forgotten detergent. My eyes darted around the room. The machines were enormous, built for a scale of laundry far beyond a single household. They looked like something from a factory, not an ancestral home. Each one was running, churning away at nothing. Empty, what were they washing? And who had turned them on? The blueprint, a sterile grid of lines and dimensions, lay abandoned. My pen, once a featherweight instrument of precision, now felt like a leaden anchor, useless. I saw only the phantom flicker of flames in the clean lines of another residential tower, heard the faint echoes of screams in the expansive views a client so eagerly desired. There was no solace in steel and glass, not for me, not anymore. I needed brick, stone, something ancient and unyielding to hold me. I needed the ancestral home. The drive north was a blur of highway markers and rain-streaked windows. The city shrank in my rearview mirror, a receding silhouette of concrete and glass, taking with it the phantom scent of smoke that clung to my clothes, to my skin, to my very bones. I had left the key to my apartment with a colleague, a quiet man with kind eyes who understood unspoken burdens. My firm, for now, was a voicemail message. My life, as I knew it, was packed into the back of a rented truck, heading towards a past I had always avoided. The road narrowed, winding through a forgotten canopy of old-growth trees. Sunlight, already weak, struggled to pierce the dense foliage, casting the asphalt in a perpetual twilight. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp, earthy scent of decaying leaves and something else, something metallic like old pennies or stagnant water. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, gripped tight. This was it. The land my grandfather had spoken of, the house my father had fled. It emerged from the gloom like a slumbering beast, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky. Gables rose and fell, punctuated by chimneys that looked like broken teeth. The paint, once a proud, deep green, had peeled in leprous patches, revealing the gray wood beneath. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked across the stone foundation, wrestling with dying rose bushes that clawed at the front porch. The windows, dark and empty, stared out like vacant eyes. It was larger than I remembered from the faded photographs, more imposing, more alive. A shiver traced a cold path down my spine despite the relative warmth of the truck's cabin. Unlocking the heavy oak front door felt like breaking a seal. The air inside was thick, stagnant, tasting of dust, mildew, and something else, something faintly sweet, like forgotten potpourri, but with an underlying sourness that prickled my nose. A fine layer of gray dust coated every surface, undisturbed for decades. The house inhaled my presence, or so it felt. It didn't welcome me, it simply acknowledged. I spent the first few days in a determined frenzy, a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos. Boxes were unpacked, their contents sorted into piles of keep, donate, or burn. I scrubbed away layers of grime from kitchen counters, swept cobwebs from corners that seemed to stretch into infinity. Each swing of the broom, each wipe of a cloth, was a small victory against the encroaching decay, a defiant act against the house's silent protest. I was here to make a new start, to rebuild, and I would not be deterred. One afternoon, I was hauling a particularly heavy box of old linens down the narrow, creaking stairs. When the light returned, a small, porcelain bird figurine, one I distinctly remembered placing on the mantelpiece in the living room just an hour before, sat perched precariously on the newel post at the foot of the stairs. Its painted eyes seemed to stare directly at me. My breath hitched. I froze, the heavy box digging into my ribs. Had I really placed it there? My memory, usually so precise, felt hazy, blurred by exhaustion and the sheer volume of things I was trying to organize. I was tired, overwhelmed. I told myself it was just a lapse, a trick of the light, a faulty memory. Later that evening, the house settled around me, groaning and creaking as the temperature dropped. I found myself in the laundry room, industrial machines humming. The hum was a low, resonant thrum, a constant vibration beneath my feet, emanating from the ancient, rust-streaked washing machine and dryer that had clearly seen generations of soiled clothes. I'd managed to get them running, a small triumph, and the scent of detergent mixed with the house's underlying mustiness. I was folding a stack of faded towels when I heard it. It was faint, barely audible above the rhythmic clunk of the washing machine, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement or perhaps someone breathing too close to my ear. I stopped, a towel half folded in my hands. I turned slowly, scanning the cramped space. There was only a stack of empty laundry baskets, the back of the dryer, and the peeling wallpaper. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and uncertain in the enclosed space. The hum of the machine seemed to intensify, vibrating through the floorboards. I waited, heart thudding a slow, heavy beat against my ribs, listening intently. Nothing, just the relentless mechanical thrum. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. The old pipes, the wind outside, my own tired imagination playing tricks. I dismissed it, forcing myself to finish folding the towels. As I reached for the last one, something brushed against the back of my neck. It felt like a feather or a wisp of hair, but there was nothing there. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, my eyes wide. The laundry room was empty, save for the old machines and the folded clothes. And then faintly, undeniably, I smelled it again. That sweet, sour scent, stronger now, clinging to the cold air around me. It was the house, I thought. Or was it something else entirely? The phantom flicker, the faint echoes, they clung to me even as I pushed away from the drafting table. My eyes burned, not from the harsh glare of the desk lamp, but from the images etched behind my eyelids. I needed a break, a distraction, something mundane to ground me. The silence of the old house, usually a comfort, now felt like a held breath, amplifying every creak, every rustle of dry leaves outside. I needed a chore, something physical. A pile of clothes, still packed from the move, lay in a forgotten corner of my temporary study. Sweat-stained shirts, dusty trousers from unpacking. They needed washing. A simple task, a ritual of normalcy. I gathered them, the rough cotton cool against my clammy hands, and headed towards the back of the house, towards the utility areas I'd barely explored. The air grew heavy as I descended the narrow, winding stairs to the basement level. The scent of damp earth and something metallic like old iron intensified with each step. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast long, shifting shadows that danced with my every movement. I found the door I was looking for, a heavy, splintered oak slab that groaned in protest as I pushed it open. Inside was the laundry room, industrial machines humming. The sound was a low, resonant thrum, a mechanical heartbeat that vibrated through the concrete floor. Two enormous ancient washing machines, their metal exteriors dented and stained, stood like sentinels against one wall. Opposite them, a colossal dryer, its drum wider than my chest, rotated with a steady, rhythmic hiss. The air was thick with the faint smell of stale detergent and something else, something cloying and sweet like dried flowers left too long in a vase. I frowned. I hadn't used these machines. I hadn't even bought detergent yet, and I certainly hadn't heard them running before. My eyes scanned the room. The floor was clean, swept. No piles of laundry, no signs of recent activity, yet the dryer rumbled, a slow, deliberate rotation. Unease pricked at the back of my neck. I walked towards the dryer, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud over the machine's drone. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cool, rough metal. The heat radiating from the vent was faint, barely noticeable. It had been running for a while then, but why? Who? I pulled the heavy latch. The drum, still slowly turning, revealed a single item inside. It wasn't one of my clothes. It was a child's dress, small and faded, made of a fine, almost translucent cotton, embroidered with tiny, intricate flowers. It looked ancient, the fabric brittle with age, and it was damp. My breath hitched. I stared at the dress, then at the empty, churning drum. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't me forgetting something. My hands trembled as I pulled the dress out. It was heavy with moisture despite the dryer running. The scent of the dried flowers I'd noticed earlier was stronger now, clinging to the fabric, but underneath it, a faint, undeniable smell of damp earth. I dropped the dress back into the dryer as if it had burned me. My heart gave a frantic lurch. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room, searching for an explanation. A draft? A prank. But who would prank me in an abandoned house? The previous owners had been gone for decades. Then the dryer shuddered. The rhythmic hiss faltered, then stopped altogether. I stood frozen, listening. The air felt heavy, pressing down on me. My ears strained, trying to pick up any sound, any indication that I wasn't alone. A faint click. Then the machine started again, not with its previous steady hum, but with a new, uneven thudding, as if something heavy and unbalanced was tumbling inside. Thump, thump, thump. It was a slow, deliberate sound like a heartbeat or footsteps. My chest tightened, my lungs burning for air. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the concrete floor. I took a shaky step back, then another. The thudding grew louder, faster. Thump, thump, thump. It was frantic now, a desperate, rapid beating. The entire machine vibrated, rattling against the wall. I could almost feel the presence of something unseen, trapped within that rotating drum. My vision blurred at the edges. Was I seeing things, hearing things, the stress, the guilt, the sleepless nights? Was it finally breaking me? My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, an old motor giving out, a broken part, but the child's dress, the smell, the sudden stop and restart. I stumbled out of the laundry room, slamming the heavy oak door shut behind me, the sound reverberating through the silent basement. I didn't care about the clothes anymore. I just needed to be away from that thudding, away from the image of that small, forgotten dress. Back in my study, the familiar blueprints on the table offered no comfort. My hands still trembled. I paced, trying to convince myself it was nothing. An old house, old machines, old smells. My imagination fueled by grief. Yes, that had to be it. I was tired. I was grieving. My mind was playing tricks. I tried to focus on the blueprints again, forcing my attention to the clean lines, the precise angles. I picked up my pen, but my hand shook too much to draw a steady line. My gaze drifted to the corner of my desk, where a small stack of reference books lay, and there, nestled between two architectural journals, was a small wooden rocking horse. It was old, intricately carved, covered in a fine layer of dust, as if it had been sitting there for years. I had never seen it before. I had cleared this desk myself meticulously when I'd moved in. There was no way it could have been there. My breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the one I'd heard in the laundry room. I reached out a tentative finger, brushing the dust. The wood felt cool, smooth, strangely comforting, yet utterly terrifying. Where had it come from? Had I put it there myself? In some fugue state? Some desperate attempt to fill the emptiness of this house with phantom memories? Or was I not alone in this house at all? The silence of the old house pressed in, a heavy shroud woven from dust and forgotten sighs. I pushed away from the drafting table, the harsh glare of the desk lamp doing little to dispel the gloom that had begun to feel less like a shadow and more like a presence. My eyes burned, not from the light, but from the phantom flicker of movement I'd caught in the periphery, the faint echoes that clung to me like burrs. I needed a break, a distraction, something mundane to ground me before the edges of my sanity frayed completely. Laundry, yes, the simple rhythmic churn of machines. A task requiring no complex thought, just the methodical sorting of fabrics, the scent of detergent. I gathered my clothes, a small pile of practical, worn things, and started down the long, winding hallway. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, a familiar complaint now, less startling than it had been. My architect's eye, however, couldn't help but trace the subtle shifts in the plaster, the hairline cracks that spiderwebbed across the ceiling, the slight, almost imperceptible sag of the lintels above the doorways. The house was old, yes, but these were not merely signs of age. There was an underlying tension in its bones, a structural unease that I, as a designer of structures, instinctively felt. It was like looking at a building with a hidden fault, an imbalance that promised eventual collapse. I found the laundry room, industrial machines humming, tucked away in the deepest part of the basement. The air here was thick with a damp heat, smelling faintly of bleach and stale water, a stark contrast to the musty, dry air upstairs. Two enormous, battered washing machines and a colossal dryer pulsed with a low, rhythmic thrum, their vibrations resonating through the concrete floor. The sheer scale of them suggested a past life, perhaps a boarding house or some kind of commercial enterprise. I opened the lid of one washer, its metallic maw gleaming under a single bare bulb. As I loaded the clothes, the mundane task felt almost therapeutic. I watched the water begin to fill, a churning vortex of suds. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to simply exist in the present, away from the drafting table and the haunting images it evoked. Then a flicker, not a visual one this time, but a sensation. It brushed against the back of my neck, raising gooseflesh. I spun around, my hands still buried in the laundry, scanning the small room. There was no open window, no obvious vent. The only door was firmly shut. The machines continued their relentless hum, their mechanical pulse unwavering. Was it just the ventilation? An old house. Drafts were to be expected. I told myself this, but my gaze lingered on the far wall, a thick expanse of rough-hewn stone partially obscured by a rusted utility sink. It seemed too solid, too uniform for a basement wall. My architectural instincts pricked. Something felt wrong about its construction. My mind, now fully engaged, began to sift through the house's structure, dissecting it piece by piece. I needed a logical explanation. I needed to understand the mechanics of this place, to strip away the supernatural veneer and expose the underlying truth. No, faulty foundations, settling timbers, exploding pipes, anything but that. Back upstairs, I retrieved my toolkit and a powerful flashlight. Forget the blueprints I'd received, they were incomplete, vague. I needed to make my own. I started in the living room, tapping the walls, listening to the subtle differences in sound. My fingers traced the intricate molding, feeling for inconsistencies, patches, repairs. The house was a living document of its own history, each nail and beam a word in a silent language. I moved methodically, room by room, my flashlight beam cutting through the gathering dusk outside. I ran my hands over the rough plaster, seeking out seams, hidden doors, anything that didn't align with the visible structure. It looked solid, plastered over like the rest, but when I tapped it, the sound was subtly different. A duller thud, less resonant than the surrounding plaster. It was almost imperceptible, something only an architect trained to discern the integrity of walls would notice. I pressed harder then again, dense as if something had been added, layered over. My determination hardened. This wasn't just an old house settling. This was a deliberate alteration. I grabbed a small chisel and a hammer from my kit. With careful, controlled taps, I began to chip away at the plaster. Fine dust plumed into the air, catching in the beam of my flashlight. The sound was surprisingly loud in the hushed room, a percussive assault on the quiet. Slowly, a patch of older, rougher plaster emerged beneath the newer coat. I continued, my movements precise, until a small section of the underlying material was exposed. It wasn't brick, as I might have expected from the original construction, nor was it lath and plaster, and it had been hastily, almost crudely nailed into place. My heart began to pick up its pace, a frantic drum against my ribs. I widened the opening, revealing more of the rough wooden panel. It was a patch, a cover-up. It wasn't deep, maybe a foot or so, but it was completely sealed off. Why would someone build a false wall, creating a hidden, unused space like this? What was it meant to conceal? The harsh glare of the desk lamp did little to dispel the gloom that had begun to feel less like a shadow and more like a presence. My eyes burned, not from the light, but from the strain of staring at blueprints that refused to offer solace, only stark reminders of what I'd lost. I pushed away from the drafting table, the scrape of the chair a violent intrusion in the stifling quiet. I needed to move, to do something, anything, to break the suffocating hold of my own thoughts. Downstairs, I found a pile of old, musty linens in a forgotten cupboard, their fabric stiff with disuse. A mundane task, cleaning. Perhaps it would lend a sense of order to the chaos brewing inside me. I carried the bundle through the echoing halls, the floorboards groaning underfoot, each creak like a sigh from the house itself. I pushed open a heavy wooden door, revealing the laundry room, industrial machines humming. The sound was a shock after the house's profound quiet, a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the floor. It was a large, utilitarian space, unlike the rest of the house. Concrete floor, bare brick walls, and 3 enormous ancient washing machines, their metal casings scarred with rust and age. The air here was thick with the faint, lingering scent of stale detergent and dampness, cut through with an acrid metallic tang I couldn't quite place. I approached the nearest machine, a behemoth of steel and tarnished brass. Its circular door, secured by a heavy latch, looked like something from a forgotten factory. I wrestled it open, the hinges protesting with a drawn-out shriek, and began to feed the stiff, yellowed sheets into its cavernous drum. My hands worked on autopilot, my mind still a churning whirlpool of grief and guilt. Every rustle of the fabric, every clank of the machine seemed to echo the relentless accusations in my head. My fault. It wasn't lint. Curiosity, a fleeting distraction from my inner turmoil, pricked at me. It pulled free with a soft shhhh stick, like peeling wet tape from a surface. I held it up, examining it under the harsh, bare bulb overhead. As I turned it, a tiny, almost imperceptible etching on the metal casing behind where it had been lodged caught the light. It was a symbol, crudely rendered, a small, distorted figure bent over, head bowed, an unmistakable curve indicating a tear falling from its eye. My breath hitched. The image was stark, profoundly sad. It was so small, so easy to miss, yet now that I saw it, it felt like a scream in the quiet hum of the machines. I remembered the stories the agent had told me, hushed tales of the previous inhabitants. The family who had lost a child within these very walls. The owner who had withered away, consumed by a sorrow no amount of wealth could assuage. Grief, profound and unending, had been a constant companion in this house long before I arrived. It wasn't just old lint, it felt like something harvested. My gaze swept over the industrial machines humming, their low thrumming no longer just a mechanical sound, but a deeper, more sinister vibration. It felt like a digestive process, like they were grinding away not at dirt but at something else, something intangible yet potent. The entity, the presence I'd felt, it fed. It didn't just exist alongside sorrow, it consumed it. And the house, these machines, they were part of the mechanism. The profound grief that had been the undoing of those who lived here before me, the crushing guilt I carried from my own family's tragedy, it wasn't just a burden I bore. It was an offering. My grief was its sustenance. The metallic tang in the air sharpened, tasting like old iron and something else, something bitter and acrid. The hum of the machine seemed to swell, growing louder, more insistent, vibrating through the concrete floor and up into my bones. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I felt exposed, laid bare, my deepest wounds suddenly visible, not just to myself, but to something ancient and hungry. The fibers in my hand felt like a piece of its leavings, a fragment of its terrible diet. What had it done with the sorrow it consumed from them? And what would it do with mine? Curiosity, a fleeting distraction from my inner turmoil, pulled me towards the colossal dryer. The hum of the industrial machines in the laundry room vibrated through the concrete floor, a low, persistent thrumming that usually offered a strange sort of comfort in its monotony. Now it felt like a growing tremor beneath my feet. My fingers, still damp from the last load of linens, reached into the lint trap. The bundle was exactly as it had appeared, a tightly packed wad of something fibrous, almost like matted hair but colder, denser. My skin prickled as I pulled it free. It wasn't lint at all. It was dark, a shade I couldn't quite place between deep charcoal and dried blood, and felt strangely heavy for its size. My thumb brushed against its surface, noting the coarse, brittle texture like desiccated root matter or, God help me, something organic that had been slowly baked and pressed. A faint, acrid smell like burnt sugar mixed with damp earth clung to it. It wasn't strong enough to fill the cavernous laundry room, but it was potent right under my nose, a sickly sweet decay that made my stomach clench. I squeezed it and it didn't give. It felt like a solid, petrified mass, something ancient and deeply unpleasant. What was this? Why was it here, so deeply embedded in the mechanics of a machine designed for cleanliness? This house, this thing in the house, was seeping into everything. The thought made my skin crawl. I dropped the bundle as if it had suddenly heated, watching it land with a dull thud on the worn tile floor. It lay there, an inert, malevolent slug. A sudden, sharp clang echoed from the far end of the laundry room where a stack of empty metal laundry carts stood. It sounded like one had shifted, scraping against another, though no breeze stirred the heavy air. The industrial humming seemed to dip, then surge, an uneven rhythm that grated on my nerves. This was it. I couldn't stay. Not another minute. I had to leave. I had to get out of this place before it consumed me entirely. My chest felt tight, a physical constriction that made each breath a conscious effort. The exit to the service corridor, the quickest way to the back door, was my only focus. My legs moved, at first stiffly, then with a desperate urgency. The floor seemed to tilt imperceptibly, or perhaps it was just my own disequilibrium. The air grew heavy, thick, as if I were pushing through a viscous liquid. The industrial machines, still humming, now sounded less like mechanical work and more like a chorus of low, guttural moans. Each step I took seemed to draw out the sounds, amplify them. I reached the heavy, steel-plated door leading out of the laundry room. I pushed. The door, which usually opened with a solid, satisfying thud, resisted. It juddered, then held fast. I pushed again, harder this time, bracing my foot against the floor. A groan, deep and resonant, seemed to emanate not from the door, but from the very walls around me. No, I muttered, my voice thin and reedy in the echoing space. My fingers slipped on the handle. I pulled, twisted, pushed with all my might. The door remained sealed, unyielding. It was as if it had been welded shut in the last few seconds. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't right. I had used this door countless times. I turned, scanning the vast laundry room. Another exit, smaller, led to a storage area. I stumbled towards it, my vision blurring at the edges. The humming of the machines intensified, a deafening roar that vibrated through my bones. The air grew frigid, biting at my exposed skin. I reached the second door, a lighter wooden panel, usually unlocked. My hand fumbled for the knob, twisting it frantically. It spun freely, uselessly, without engaging the latch. I shoved my shoulder against the door once, twice. It didn't budge. It felt as solid as the steel door, immovable, impenetrable. My gaze darted around the laundry room, desperation clawing at my throat. The windows. There were high, grimy windows almost at ceiling height, letting in slivers of weak, gray light. Too high, too small. I was trapped. The house wasn't just haunting me, it was holding me. It had allowed me to wander, to discover, to grieve. But it had no intention of letting me leave. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable malevolence. My skin felt raw, exposed. My scalp tingled as if unseen fingers were combing through my hair. I closed my eyes, clenching them shut, trying to block out the suffocating reality. The space where it had been was clean, pristine, as if it had never existed. But the sickly sweet decay, the scent of burnt sugar and damp earth, was now stronger, filling my nostrils, clinging to my clothes. It wasn't a word, not exactly, but a sound, a dry, rustling hiss, like countless dead leaves skittering across a vast, empty floor. It felt impossibly close, a breath against my neck. What did it want from me? The hum of the industrial machines in the laundry room, industrial machines humming, vibrated through the concrete floor, a low, persistent thrumming that usually offered a strange sort of comfort in its monotony. Now it felt like a grinding, a mechanical growl that resonated deep in my bones. I ran my hand over the cool, scarred metal casing of the dryer, the vibration a tangible tremor against my palm. The air was thick with the faint, cloying smell of old lint and damp concrete, a smell that had become as much a part of this house as the dust. My gaze drifted to the wall behind the machine, where the exhaust vent snaked upwards. Something about the paneling there seemed off, a slight misalignment, a hairline crack I hadn't noticed before. It was almost imperceptible, hidden by shadows and the sheer bulk of the appliance. A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced its way up my spine. This house, I was learning, specialized in hidden things. It didn't offer its secrets easily, but rather left breadcrumbs, tiny imperfections that nagged at the periphery of awareness until they demanded investigation. I knelt, the gritty concrete biting into my knees through my trousers. The hum of the machines intensified in my ears, a white noise threatening to swallow all other sound. With a grunt, I pushed against the dryer, trying to shift its immense weight. It barely budged. I tried again, bracing my feet, muscles straining. Slowly, grudgingly, it scraped an inch or two away from the wall, revealing more of the misaligned panel. My breath hitched. Not a cavity for pipes, but something deliberate. My fingers, trembling slightly, traced the edge of the panel. It wasn't fixed. There was a latch, almost invisible, cleverly disguised as part of the frame. My heart began to thrum, a frantic counterpoint to the steady drone of the machines. What could be hidden here in this forgotten corner of a functional room? I fumbled with the latch, my fingers clumsy with a sudden, inexplicable apprehension. The panel swung inward, revealing a cramped, dusty space. The air that wafted out was still and stale, smelling of old paper and something else. Something dry and faintly metallic, like old blood or rust. My throat tightened. Inside, nestled on a narrow shelf, was a stack of brittle, yellowed parchments, tied with a faded ribbon that crumbled at my touch. They weren't letters or ledgers, but something far more unsettling. I pulled them out, the paper rustling with the fragility of age. Each parchment was covered in meticulous, spidery script, a mix of archaic English and what looked like Latin. But it was the symbols that seized my attention, repeating patterns of interlocking lines, distorted geometric shapes, and what looked like crude, stylized figures caught in postures of agony or supplication. I spread them on the dusty concrete floor, the relentless hum of the machines vibrating through my hands. Names, dates. I recognized some of the surnames, names from the family tree I'd glimpsed in the study, distant ancestors. The dates stretched back centuries, a terrifying chronology. My eyes scanned the cryptic Latin phrases. Debitum, pactum, sustenter, sanguis. Debt, pact, sustain, blood. This wasn't just a hidden record, it was a chronicle. A ledger, yes, but not of finances. It was a record of something else, something passed down generation after generation. The symbols, I realized with a sickening lurch, weren't just decorative. They were sigils, binding marks, repeated alongside each name. My own family's history wasn't just marked by sorrow, it was defined by it, and these parchments seemed to suggest a horrifying purpose behind it all. My gaze fell to the last parchment in the stack. The script was fresher, less faded, though still antique. A name, one I knew intimately, stood out in stark relief, Rajeshwar Sharma. My own full name, my breath caught in my throat, a sharp, ragged gasp. Below it, the same intricate, terrible symbols. The hum of the industrial machines seemed to shift, deepening, vibrating not just through the floor, but through my very bones, resonating with a frequency that felt like pure malevolence. My hands began to shake uncontrollably, the parchments rustling like dry leaves. This wasn't just a house haunted by grief. This wasn't just an entity feeding on sorrow. This was a legacy, a pact forged in blood and despair, meticulously documented over generations. My family hadn't simply suffered tragedies. They had, perhaps unwittingly, fed something, nurtured it with their pain, and passed the responsibility down the line. To me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't just an inheritor of a dilapidated house. I was an inheritor of a damnation, a chosen sacrifice. They were the fuel for this horror, and I was the final, inevitable offering. My chest constricted. I struggled to draw air into my burning lungs. The mundane laundry room, with its sterile machines and practical purpose, had transformed into an altar, and I was laid out upon it. How many generations had walked this path? Was there any escape from a fate so deeply etched into my very blood? The hum of the industrial machines in the laundry room, industrial machines humming, vibrated through the concrete floor, a low, persistent thrumming that usually offered a strange sort of comfort in its rhythmic drone. But now, it felt like a pulse, a slow, deep beat emanating from the very bowels of the house, a sound far too ancient for mere machinery. My hand, slick with a fine sheen of sweat, reached for the cold metal handle of the dryer's circular door. The steel was surprisingly warm, radiating a faint internal heat that had nothing to do with recent use. No one had been down here for decades, not since the last caretaker vanished without a trace. A story whispered by the town's older residents. I yanked the handle. It didn't budge. My jaw clenched. I pulled harder, muscles in my forearm straining, still nothing. A flicker of frustration, sharp and clean, cut through the usual fog of my grief. This wasn't some flimsy domestic appliance. This was built for heavy duty, for churning out laundry from a household that once employed dozens. The mechanism should have been robust, not jammed. I braced a foot against the concrete wall and hauled again. A groan, deep and metallic, echoed from within the dryer itself, not from its hinges. It was a sound like a tortured beast, a low, drawn-out sigh of immense weight shifting. My breath hitched. The heat intensified, pressing against my palm. I peered through the thick, grimy glass of the door, nothing but darkness, no tumbling clothes, no glint of metal drum. My fingers, still gripping the handle, began to tingle, then ache, as if a faint electrical current was passing through them. The rhythmic thrumming of the other machines in the laundry room, industrial machines humming, seemed to grow louder, more insistent, no longer comforting but menacing, a chorus of mechanical beasts waking. I let go of the handle as if burned. The sudden release sent a jolt up my arm. My gaze swept across the rest of the laundry room, industrial machines humming, taking in the hulking washing machines, their dials frozen, their interiors probably a nest of rust and forgotten fabric. This place was a mausoleum of forgotten domesticity, yet something here felt alive, expectant. The air, thick with the scent of mildew and old lye, suddenly seemed to press in on me, heavy and suffocating. A new resolve, brittle but sharp, began to form. I was done being a passive observer, a victim. My family was gone, and I blamed myself, but this house, this thing in the house, was preying on that guilt. It was time to stop running, to stop cowering. I needed to understand what it was and how to fight it. My eyes, no longer clouded by fear, began to scan the room with a new purpose. This wasn't just a laundry room, it was a part of the house, and every part of this house held secrets. My gaze fell upon a stack of old ledgers, tucked away on a dusty shelf above a chipped porcelain sink. They were bound in crumbling leather, their pages yellowed and brittle. I pulled one down, the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light that pierced the grimy window. The ledger was heavy, smelling of decay and forgotten paper. I opened it carefully, the spine groaning in protest. It wasn't a record of laundry cycles, as I might have expected. The cramped, spidery handwriting chronicled expenses, material orders, and most surprisingly, architectural modifications. Dates stretched back over a century, long before my time, before my father's time. My fingers traced the faded ink. Entry after entry detailed additions, reinforced walls, strange structural alterations that seemed to deviate from standard practice. Reinforced sub-basement access, one entry read dated 1897. Ventilation shaft sealed south wing. Another from 1903, construction of sound dampening chamber west wall. Sound dampening chamber. Why would a stately home need such a thing? My heart began to beat a quick, uneven rhythm. This wasn't just renovation. This was concealment. I flipped more pages, scanning for anything that seemed out of place. Then I found it. An entry almost illegible, dated 1912. It mentioned a conduit for spiritual egress and sympathetic resonance chambers. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't architectural jargon. This was something else entirely. Occult, supernatural. My family hadn't just built a house, they had built a trap or perhaps a cage. I looked up from the ledger, my eyes sweeping across the laundry room, industrial machines humming again. The humming machines, the colossal dryer, the sealed ventilation shafts mentioned in another entry, it all started to coalesce into a terrifying picture. This house wasn't just haunted, it was designed to be. My ancestors weren't just architects, they were something else. It was part of the structure woven into its very fabric. The ledger shook slightly in my hands. My palms were clammy. This was no longer just about survival. It was about uncovering a truth my family had buried deep within these walls, a truth that now threatened to consume me. What exactly had they built here, and for what purpose? The hum of the industrial machines in the laundry room. Industrial machines humming, vibrated through the concrete floor. A low, persistent thrumming that usually offered a strange sort of comfort in its rhythmic monotony. But not today. Today, it felt like a bass drum beating beneath my ribs, a prelude to something I didn't want to face but knew I had to. The air in the room was thick, a cloying blend of stale detergent, metallic heat, and something else, something damp and earthy like disturbed soil. I could taste the dust on my tongue, gritty and ancient. The single bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling cast long, dancing shadows that stretched and shrank with the spin cycles, making the already cavernous space feel alive, watchful. My gaze swept over the rows of washers and dryers, their metallic bodies gleaming dully in the dim light, each one a silent, hulking sentinel. The hum wasn't comforting anymore. It was a drone, a low growl that vibrated up my legs, through my spine directly into the soft tissue of my brain. I reached the largest dryer, its enormous drum a gaping maw. The steel felt cold under my trembling fingers, despite the heat radiating from its motor. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the machine, not part of its operational vibration, but something else, something deeper. I leaned closer, my ear against the cool metal. Then a flicker of movement, not inside the dryer, but in the periphery of my vision. At the far end of the laundry room, it stood by the row of laundry carts, half obscured by a mountain of faded linen. My heart lurched, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I hadn't heard anyone enter. The door had remained shut, bolted from the inside. How long had they been there? "Who's there?" My voice cracked, swallowed by the relentless hum. The figure didn't move. I took a hesitant step forward, then another, my eyes straining in the gloom. The smell of damp earth intensified, mingled with something sickly sweet like decaying flowers. As I drew nearer, the features of the figure slowly resolved. It was a woman, her hair a tangled mess, streaked with gray and hanging over her face like a veil. Her clothes, a threadbare dress and a tattered shawl, looked like they'd been salvaged from a forgotten trunk, smelling faintly of mildew and disuse. Her skin was sallow, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, and her eyes, when she finally lifted her head, were wide and vacant like windows to an empty room. There was a peculiar wetness around her mouth, and her lips moved silently at first, then a low murmur escaped them. "I feel it, don't I?" Her voice was a rasp like dry leaves skittering across concrete. It was unnervingly calm, almost conversational, despite the wildness in her eyes. "The weight, the pressure, who are I?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she took a shuffling step forward, her bare feet making no sound on the concrete floor. "It finds the cracks, the places where the light doesn't reach, the guilt, the sorrow." She gestured vaguely around the laundry room, her arm moving with a strange, jerky motion like a marionette. "All the things we try to wash away, it feeds on them." My mind raced, grappling with her words. Was she a former inhabitant, someone else trapped by this house? What are I talking about? What feeds? A faint, unsettling smile touched her lips, revealing teeth that seemed too long, too yellow. "It remembers every mistake, every regret. It plays them back over and over until the edges blur, until I can't tell what's real and what's just the echo." His gaze sharpened, fixing on mine with an intensity that made me recoil. "Like the fire, Raj, the burning, the screams, I hear them, don't I?" The mention of the fire, my family, ripped through me like a physical blow. My breath hitched. This wasn't just some deranged stranger, she knew. She knew my deepest shame, my most unbearable pain. My vision blurred for a moment, the hum of the machines growing louder, threatening to overwhelm me. "How do I know about that?" She ignored my question, her eyes now darting around the room as if watching invisible threads. "It loves the grief. It gets fat on it. And the guilt. Oh, the guilt is the sweetest feast. It binds I hear, keeps I close." She extended a hand, her fingers thin and skeletal, pointing towards the colossal dryer. "It showed me my own mistakes, my failures, the things I couldn't save." Her words, so specific, so insidious, were designed to pry open the wounds I desperately tried to keep closed. This was the entity's method then. Not outright violence, but a slow, psychological torture, a reliving of trauma until the victim broke, until they became. It wants you to remember," she continued, her voice gaining a strange, sing-song quality. "To feel it all again, to drown in it, just like I did, just like all of them did." Her eyes, once vacant, now held a glint of something malicious, something ancient and hungry. "And when you're ready, when you're truly broken, it will take you too." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. This wasn't an ally, he was a lure, a manifestation of the entity's insidious power. I had to fight back. I couldn't succumb to the despair she embodied. No, I managed, my voice stronger than I expected. I won't give it what it wants. Her smile widened, a truly horrific sight. You have no choice, architect. You built this house of sorrow. You laid the foundation with your own regret. She took another step, then another, closing the distance between us. Her movements were fluid now, no longer jerky but unnervingly graceful. The damp, earthy smell intensified, choking me, waiting. This wasn't just a woman, it was a conduit, a puppet, and it was trying to break me. I stumbled back, desperate to create distance. The hum of the machines roared in my ears, the entire laundry room seeming to tilt. The woman lunged, not with a scream, but with a silent, predatory swiftness that was utterly inhuman. Her skeletal fingers reached for my face, aiming for my eyes. I ducked, narrowly avoiding her grasp, and scrambled backwards, my foot catching on something unseen. Pain exploded behind my eyes. When my vision cleared, the woman was gone. The laundry room was empty, save for the relentless thrum of the machines, the metallic heat, and the lingering, awful smell. And it was not water. It was thick. It was black. What was it? And where had she gone? My stumble was less about a physical misstep and more about the sudden jolt of understanding that ripped through me. The woman wasn't just a victim, he was a vessel. A puppet, yes, but one animated by a cold, ancient intelligence that had stared out at me through her vacant eyes. It had tried to break me, to grind my will to dust, but something else stirred instead. A furious, defiant resolve. No more running, no more cowering. I was done being prey. The house had always felt like a labyrinth, but now I saw it as a cage, and I, the architect, would find its weak points. I thought of the blueprints I'd obsessed over, the hidden passages, the forgotten spaces. There was one area deep in the foundations that had always been a mystery, a void on the schematics labeled only access restricted family records. A place my father had always forbidden me from exploring, even in my youth. That was it. That had to be it. I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in weeks, the ghost of the woman's empty gaze burning at the edges of my vision. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight filtering through tall, grimy windows, looking like tiny, lost souls. The house groaned around me, a symphony of settling timbers and shifting foundations, or perhaps something more sinister, reacting to my newfound defiance. I ignored it all. My mind was a steel trap, focused on the lowest level, on the secrets buried beneath my ancestral home. The basement was a warren of forgotten rooms, each smelling faintly of damp earth and decay. I passed rusted tools, forgotten furniture draped in white sheets like shrouded corpses, and shelves laden with crumbling books. I pushed deeper, following the familiar-unfamiliar layout of the house I had once studied so intently. Then I found it, the laundry room, industrial machines humming. The sound hit me first, a low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the concrete floor and up into my bones. It was a mechanical heartbeat, steady and relentless, but it felt wrong, too heavy for just laundry. The air in here was thick with the scent of stagnant water and old soap, overlaid with something metallic and acrid like ozone. 3 massive washing machines, relics from a bygone era, stood against one wall, their steel drums glinting dully. The humming was louder here, a deep, pervasive drone that seemed to fill my skull. The blueprints had shown a small, unmarked space here, a structural anomaly. I pushed against the wall, felt nothing, but the humming. It seemed to emanate from behind the machines, not just from them. I pulled one of the washers, its rusted feet scraping a harsh protest against the floor. It was heavier than it looked, but my adrenaline gave me strength. Inch by agonizing inch, I dragged it away from the wall, revealing a section of stone that looked different, too neatly cut, too perfectly aligned. A faint seam, a hidden door. My fingers traced the outline, finding a small, almost invisible latch. It clicked with a muffled thud that was swallowed by the relentless hum of the machines. I pulled. The stone slab swung inward with a groan, revealing a pitch-black aperture. The passage was narrow, leading down a steep, uneven set of stone steps. Each step was slick with a strange, viscous dampness. I could feel cobwebs brushing against my face, thick and sticky. This wasn't just a hidden room, it felt like descending into the earth's throat. The walls here were not stone, but something else entirely rough, uneven, almost organic. My phone beam cut through the black, revealing walls that seemed to writhe, their surface a tangled mass of what looked like roots or veins, pulsing faintly with a dim internal light. It wasn't natural. This wasn't architecture. This was something grown. I reached the bottom of the steps, finding myself in a cavernous space. The ceiling was low, pressing down, and the air was so heavy it felt like breathing water. My phone light struggled to pierce the gloom, but I could make out shapes, impossible geometry. Columns that twisted like tortured limbs, arches that sagged and swelled. The walls were still covered in that strange, root-like growth, but here it was thicker, pulsating with a sickly, greenish luminescence. It was like standing inside a monstrous, inverted tree. Then I saw it. In the center of the chamber, on a raised dais formed from the same organic, twisting matter, lay an open book, ancient, bound in what looked like dried, cracked leather. Each object resonated with a palpable hum of grief, a quiet echo of loss. I stumbled forward, drawn by an awful curiosity, my feet crunching on something dry and brittle on the floor. Bones, small ones. My light fell upon the open pages of the book. The script was archaic, spidery, but some of the words were starkly clear, repeating like a mantra. Sacrifice, connection, sustenance. And then a name, my family name, my ancestors, my breath caught. This wasn't just a lair for the entity, it was its heart, its genesis. My family hadn't merely inherited a haunted house, they had cultivated the haunting. The entity fed on grief, yes, but it wasn't random. My guilt, my family's tragedy. It was all part of a grand design, a feast prepared over centuries. The walls around me seemed to constrict, the root-like growths pulsing faster, brighter, their sickly green light now revealing grotesque, almost human-like faces contorted in silent screams within their fibrous tangles. They were the faces of the lost, the consumed, my family, my wife, my daughter. Their spectral visages swirled in the pulsing green light, their eyes fixed on me, accusing, "You built this, you let this happen." A wave of nausea washed over me, but the anger still burned. This wasn't just my guilt anymore. This was a legacy of horror I was forced to inherit, to confront. And now I, the last architect, stood at the precipice of its true horror. Could I dismantle what my ancestors had so painstakingly built? The precipice. It was a word that had clawed at me, tearing at my sleep since I first set foot in this house. But now, it felt less like a chasm to fall into and more like a launching point. My family hadn't just been victims, they had been architects of this darkness, weaving it into the very foundations of their legacy. And I, the last architect, would not merely inherit it, I would dismantle it. A cold resolve settled in my chest, a counterweight to the leaden grief that usually anchored me. I gripped the tattered blueprints, the ones I'd found hidden in the study, their edges brittle under my thumb. They were crude, less about precise measurements and more about a ritualistic flow, strange symbols scrawled in margins where load-bearing walls should have been detailed. I saw it now, the terrifying intent behind every beam, every hidden cavity. This wasn't just a house, it was a mechanism. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I moved through the silent halls. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. Every breath I took felt like drawing in dust and despair. It knew I was coming. My destination was not a grand chamber or a forgotten crypt. It was the laundry room tucked away in the deepest part of the cellar. I had dismissed it before as a utilitarian afterthought, a modern convenience in an ancient structure. But the blueprints had shown me otherwise. They marked it as a central node, a convergence point for the house's most disturbing energies. As I descended the final, creaking steps, the low thrumming grew louder. It wasn't the distant drone of machines anymore. It was a physical vibration, resonating through the stone floor, up my legs, into my bones. I pushed open the heavy wooden door. The laundry room was exactly as I remembered it, yet profoundly different. 3 enormous industrial machines dominated the space, their chrome surfaces dulled with age, their gears visibly massive, designed for a scale of work far beyond domestic chores. They hummed, a deep, resonant chord that filled the space, vibrating my teeth. Steam rose from unseen vents, swirling around the ceiling, catching the anemic glow of a single bare bulb. The smell was potent here, ozone and something acrid like burnt sugar. My gaze swept over the room, the source of the relentless hum. It wasn't just the spin cycles or the dryers. The sound was too pervasive, too fundamental. I pressed my palm against its cool metal. The vibration coursed through me, a rhythmic pulse. It wasn't just machinery, it was the house itself, working. Then I saw it etched into the floor beneath the machines, partially obscured by years of grime and rust. A series of interlocking circles, symbols I recognized from the blueprints, the same ones scrawled in the margins. This wasn't a laundry room. This was a processing chamber. The machines weren't washing clothes. They were extracting. They were the engines of the entity, churning grief and guilt, refining it, making it potent. The humming was the sound of the house's vile metabolism. A sudden, sharp drop in temperature made my breath plume. The steam around the ceiling began to swirl faster, coalescing, not dissipating. My family, my mother, my wife, my child. Their cries were laced with accusation, with the raw edge of their final moments. My stomach clenched, bile rising in my throat. The humming intensified, growing into a roaring crescendo that threatened to shatter my eardrums. The air grew so heavy I struggled to draw a full breath. This was it. The entity, the house, was here in its most potent form. It was feeding and it was angry. I fought the urge to recoil, to flee. No, I rasped, my voice barely audible above the din. Not anymore. I pulled out the rolled-up blueprints, my hands shaking, unfurled them on the floor, pinning them with the rocks I'd brought from the garden-specific stones, each one chosen for its density and crystalline structure, as marked on the old plans. This wasn't a battle of strength, it was a battle of design. I traced a finger along a particular sequence of symbols on the blueprint, then looked up at the ceiling where a single thick pipe ran directly into the largest of the industrial machines. It was a conduit, a primary artery. The plans showed a way to reverse to sever the connection, to starve the engine. It was an architect's solution, a structural vulnerability I had only just understood. It had no eyes, no mouth, but I felt its focus, its ancient, malevolent hunger fixed on me. My head throbbed, a sharp, piercing pain behind my eyes. I felt hands, icy and phantom, clawing at my skin, pulling at my clothes, trying to drag me down. I staggered but held my ground, my gaze fixed on the pipe, on the symbols. I had to focus, I had to sever it. My plan was risky, based on an ancient, convoluted understanding of the house's true purpose. If I was wrong, if I misread the symbols, I wouldn't just fail. I would become another part of the hum, another echo in the engine. You feed on us, I choked out, my voice raw, but I am an architect. I can starve you. With a surge of desperate energy, I lunged towards the pipe, ignoring the phantom claws, the suffocating pressure, the blinding pain in my head. My hand, guided by the diagram, reached for a specific valve, a rusted lever hidden behind a tangle of old wiring. It was stiff, unyielding, fused with age. I pulled, straining every muscle. The entity shrieked, a sound that ripped through the very fabric of the room, through my soul. The industrial machines roared, their humming transforming into a violent, grinding shudder. The ground beneath me vibrated so violently I thought the floor would crack open. Was this the end of the hum, or just the beginning of something far worse? My fingers, raw and trembling, locked onto the rusted lever. It was cold, brutally cold, and the phantom claws, though unseen, raked across my skin, leaving behind a searing chill. The suffocating pressure in my head intensified, a vice tightening around my skull, threatening to burst it open. My vision flickered, blurring at the edges, but I focused on the lever, on the diagram seared into my memory. This was it. This had to be it. My muscles screamed. I pushed, grunted, strained, every fiber of my being dedicated to this single, desperate act. The lever resisted, a stubborn ancient thing, fused by time and perhaps by something darker. I could hear the metal groan, a tortured shriek that echoed the one forming in my own throat. My knuckles were white, my arm trembling uncontrollably. Then, with a sickening crack that resonated deep in the bones of the house itself, the lever gave way. It lurched, grinding through years of corrosion, turning with a final, violent shudder. The immediate aftermath was a visceral shock. The phantom claws, which had been digging into my back and neck, vanished, leaving behind only the ghost of their icy touch. A wave of nausea washed over me, so potent it stole my breath. My vision swam, a kaleidoscope of gray and black. I lay there, chest heaving, the world spinning around me. Every inch of my body ached, a deep, bone-wearying exhaustion settling in. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent drumbeat behind my eyes. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. My limbs protested, screaming with every movement. My hands scraped against the rough concrete. The air, though no longer thick with that suffocating weight, still felt heavy, charged. I noticed a network of fresh cracks spiderwebbing across the wall where the pipe emerged, fine lines radiating outwards like a shattered pane of glass. A faint, almost musical hum resonated through the floor beneath my feet, a low thrum that seemed to vibrate in my very teeth. Was it over? Had I done it? The question hung in the stagnant air, heavy and unanswered. I stumbled out of that grim recess, leaning heavily against the grimy walls, using them to guide my way. The corridors felt different, wounded. Dust motes danced in the faint, watery light that filtered from distant, grime-streaked windows, creating an eerie, almost ethereal glow. I needed to get out, or at least to a place of relative safety, somewhere not so steeped in the memory of my struggle. A low, rhythmic thrumming reached my ears, a steady, mechanical pulse. It was faint at first, then grew louder, cutting through the house's unnatural quiet. I followed it, drawn by the desperate need for something predictable, something real. The sound led me down a flight of narrow, concrete stairs, slick with condensation, and through a series of low-ceilinged passages. The air grew warmer, humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and something vaguely chemical. I pushed open a heavy, unpainted wooden door, its hinges groaning in protest. I stepped into a vast, cavernous space. The laundry room, industrial machines humming. The room stretched out before me, a concrete expanse lined with rows of massive, ancient washing machines and dryers. They were enormous, hulking contraptions of riveted steel and brass, all whirring, clanking, and humming with a dull, insistent rhythm that vibrated through the floorboards. Steam curled from some vents, creating hazy pockets in the humid air. The smell of detergent, strong and cloying, mixed with the metallic tang of old machinery and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. Why were these running? What could they possibly be washing in this abandoned place? My eyes scanned the room, trying to make sense of the absurdity. Each machine looked like it belonged in a factory, not a house. They were all in various states of operation, some gently spinning, others violently churning, their internal mechanisms a blur of motion. Stumbling past a particularly large, rumbling washing machine, my hand brushed against something tucked into a recess behind a stack of folded, mildewed sheets. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and dry. My fingers trembled as I pulled it free. It was old, impossibly old, the leather brittle beneath my touch. I opened it, the pages rustling like dry leaves. The handwriting inside was spidery, faded, but eerily familiar, almost identical to my own. It was an ancestor's. The journal wasn't a diary, not in the traditional sense. It detailed the house's history, not as a home, but as a mechanism. A series of diagrams, similar in style to the one I had found, filled the early pages, charting intricate pipe systems and ventilation shafts. My eyes darted to a specific entry dated over a century ago. It described the entity not as a ghost or a spirit, but as a gravitational anomaly, a psychic siphon. The valve I had just turned, the journal explained, was not to banish it, but to divert it, to redirect its flow, its nourishment, grief, and guilt into a different channel, a secondary filtration system. I stared at the words, unable to reconcile them with my understanding of the world. Secondary filtration system. What did that even mean? The journal mentioned it was designed to process and contain the diverted essence, preventing it from overflowing the primary containment structure. I looked up from the brittle pages, my gaze sweeping across the industrial machines in the laundry room. The rhythmic thrumming suddenly sounded less comforting, less mechanical, and more insidious. Are these giant machines part of this filtration system? Are they processing something unnatural? The pervasive smell of detergent now seemed to mask something else, something metallic and acrid, like stale blood mixed with rust. I noticed a faint, reddish stain on the concrete floor near one of the largest machines, a splotch that had seeped into the porous surface. Was it rust? Or something else entirely? The true heart remains. What does secondary filtration system truly entail? What is the true heart of the house? And what exactly are these industrial machines in the laundry room doing with the grief and guilt that fuels this place? The metallic tang of the air in the laundry room, industrial machines humming, was no longer just an odor. It was a taste, bitter and coppery, coating my tongue. The low thrum, once a background hum, had swelled into a resonant vibration that seeped into my bones. A deep, unsettling bass note in the symphony of dread. I stood before the behemoths, their arcane dials and gauges now illuminated by the harsh overhead light, the glass tubes within them swirling with viscous, dark fluids. My gaze traced the intricate network of pipes, thicker than my arm, that snaked from these machines, disappearing into the concrete floor and walls. They weren't just pipes, they were veins, arteries pumping the lifeblood of this house. It wasn't about cleaning, it was about spreading. This was the engine and the fuel. It was the grief, the guilt, the despair that had saturated generations of my family. My own anguish, I now realized, had been nothing more than a fresh infusion for its insatiable appetite. I saw it then in the slow, deliberate churn of the thick liquid behind the reinforced glass. It wasn't merely filtering. It was refining, distilling, taking the raw, potent agony of human sorrow and concentrating it into something else. This wasn't a mechanism to contain the malevolence. It was a mechanism to manufacture it, to amplify it, to make it potent enough to infect the very air I breathed. My family hadn't just been haunted, they had been farmed. Their despair cultivated. It wasn't the fear of a ghost or a monster. It was the horror of an industrial process, a calculated, methodical consumption of human suffering. My breath hitched. My hands, clammy and trembling, clenched into fists at my sides. I couldn't leave it, not now, not after understanding. To walk away would be to condemn anyone else who might ever set foot here, to leave the furnace burning. I had to stop it. I had to dismantle it, but how? There was no obvious off switch, no clearly marked panel. The machines themselves seemed ancient, yet terrifyingly efficient. I ran my gaze over the maze of pipes and wires, searching for an Achilles heel. One gauge, larger than the others, pulsed with an ominous red glow, its needle quivering at the very edge of an unmarked dial. Below it, a series of thick braided cables fed into what looked like a massive, lead-lined capacitor. As I took a step closer, the humming intensified, rising in pitch, a high-pitched whine that grated against my teeth. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure that pushed against my chest, making each breath a struggle. The floor beneath my feet vibrated violently, sending tremors up my legs. The house was fighting back. It knew asterisk. My skin crawled. They wanted me to leave. They wanted the process to continue. A jolt, not electrical, but something far more visceral, shot through me. It was a wave of pure, concentrated sorrow, a crushing weight of regret and anguish that threatened to buckle my knees. I staggered back, gasping for air, the world spinning around me. This wasn't just a machine, it was an extension of the entity, a physical manifestation of its hunger. My mind raced, grappling with the sheer audacity of what I was about to attempt. I was an architect, not a saboteur, but I had built structures before I understood systems. This was a system, albeit a horrific one. The red glowing gauge, the capacitor, that had to be it. The storage, the amplification point. If I could disrupt that, perhaps I could starve the entire mechanism. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising whine of the machines. I had to focus. I had to act. But what would happen if I succeeded? What would be unleashed? And what would be left of this house or of me when it was over?